When I got invited to come here by Nicola, he asked me to give a chat about one of the workshops that we have in Seedcamp, which is called the Product Market Fit Cycle. And it talks about how to help a company iterate through and discover what are the weak links associated with their development. Luca just finished talking about some of the elements that I talk about during my Product Market Fit Cycle presentation. The Pirate Metrics is one of those key components, and it helps you understand where things might be falling down. However, I don't want to work on the Product Market Fit Cycle today because I think there's another one that is worth exploring, especially for very, very early ecosystems that are developing ideas and founders who are experimenting with ideas. I want you guys to consider something which is, when do I pivot? When do I know that I'm doing well? When should I persevere? But when should I potentially try something different? So that's what I'm going to do. I am going to cover some of the topics that I would talk about in my other talk, but I'm going to focus mostly on that key question. I was asked to give this talk in Greece about 2-3 weeks ago, and it's called New Beginnings from Old Ends. So let's start by asking this question. If you knew you'd be better off in the future for taking action now, would you do it? The stories that I'm going to tell you, and some of the examples, are gathered from the feedback that I've received from the 127 companies that we've invested in. I've had conversations with some of the founders that have had failures, some of the founders that have had several pivots before they found product market fit. And so a lot of this is anonymized but true stories about some of the things that made people feel they could have done better, or that things that they really appreciated they did, or things that prevented them from taking action sooner. Who here has read that book by Seth Godin called The Dip? Anyone? Okay, one person. So the book has nothing to do really with startups. It's about anything in general. And it's a book about quitting. And it's literally the thinnest book I've read. You could read it in an hour. And in that book, there's a quote that Seth makes. And the next 3 slides are that quote. And I'm going to give you examples. The first one is, extraordinary benefits accrue to those who push just a tiny bit longer than most. We all heard this. The guy who puts in that extra 10% when everything is going badly is the one that tends to do better. We all hear these stories. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because there's enough TED Talks out there in the world. We know all about the great guys that are inspiration to all of us that make it to the Mount Everest. So I don't want to spend too much time here. I'm going to focus instead on... I was warned that my slides are very big, and therefore it might take a while for them to load. Are they loading? Did I switch? So the next slide is extraordinary benefits. Oh, crashed. Should have used Mac. Go back one, please. Go back one. One slide back. So the second point is extraordinary benefits accrue to those people who quit early and refocus to do something new. This is effectively that you conserve your energy. This is effectively you take whatever money you have left in your startup and you focus your energies on something new. And probably the best and most compelling story about this is the story of Twitter. There's a blog post that I wrote that goes along with this, and there's a link to the video where one of the co-founders of Twitter and Odeo.com can be heard telling the story. Basically, Odeo.com was a playlist directory for podcasts. And this was before iTunes came out. There was a hypothesis there that people would want to organize their podcast. Turns out it didn't really do too well. It wasn't doing very well, and they had a hackathon internally, And Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, basically came up with this idea that he wanted to have micro-messaging, and the rest is history. But if they had just kept on going with this concept of a podcast playlist, it would have gone nowhere, and Twitter would have never been born. So there is some merit to quitting early enough so that you can fight another battle by pivoting. Oh, man. In both cases, it's about being the best, meaning either you're persevering because you're going to be the best, or you quit early and refocus on something else because you're going to be the best. So I want to introduce, at this point in time, a topic which is part of my previous talk, and this is about the art of positioning. Now, one of the topics that we talked about, and Luca talked about, is marketing. Now, marketing itself has a lot of old school baggage with it. People think if I just come up with a message and I throw money at it and I push it, that's good enough. Actually, no, that's not good enough. There's this art of positioning which is to exploit how it is that your customers look at your product in a way that sometimes makes a huge difference in your ability to outgun bigger competitors. And the perfect example of this is when Avis Rent-A-Car was competing with Hertz. Hertz Rent-A-Car had the most number of cars, early 60s. Avis was saying that they were the best, but nobody believed them because they weren't. They weren't the best. And so if you're saying, well, look, we're better because we have this little feature, or we have that little feature, which a lot of startups do. They say, well, my startup can do this one little thing that yours cannot. That wasn't enough. The customers did not believe it. And Hertz was doing better by a lot than the next player because in the mind of the consumer, they were the best. Avis came up with this repositioning campaign where they labeled their company, "We are number 2, so we try harder." By doing that simple transition, they moved their company from being the best because we have the most cars to being the best because they have the best customer service. They made their entire organization streamline around the concept of customer service. Every single action they had to take, it wasn't just a strapline, it was every single action they took had to be around consistency and coherence in customer service. And in 1 year, they went from negative revenues to positive revenues. I mean, that's a huge change. In 1 year, it's a huge change. And all because they decided that rather than being, we have the most cars, we have the most cars, we're the best, they went, we're actually very caring of you. If you're traveling with your family, we will find you a child seat. We'll give you a map of where you want to go. And customers can believe that you're best at that, not necessarily just better than your main competitor with a feature here or there. I'm afraid to click it again. Okay. So here's a question. If we are struggling at being the best, why is it that we don't do anything? Why is it that we get stuck? And the reason why I wanted to have this chat is because I know that a lot of you, here, the startups here, are probably asking yourselves, do I continue? Do I stop? Do I continue? Do I stop? So I wanted to explore this concept of perseverance and when you should stop. These are 5 reasons why people sometimes don't take action sooner. One reason why people don't take action sooner is because the clicker is slow. Did it stop working? Yeah. Man. Usability testing, huh? Okay, so the first one is we sweat sunk costs too much. Many times we feel we've invested so much in something that we shouldn't let it go. And one of the cognitive biases, the name of it is called the IKEA Effect. And the reason why it's called the IKEA Effect is because when you build IKEA furniture, you are less likely to throw it away. Even though it's beat up, looks like crap, you built it when you were in college, and now you're 45 living with your mother, you're still not throwing it out. And the reason is because you're attached to it, because you built it. And how many of us build things and therefore feel like we shouldn't throw it out because we're attached to it? And sometimes we're also attached to what our family thinks of us, what our friends think of us, what our employees think of us, and so we don't want to take action. Number 2, we fall subject to the endowment and loss aversions effects. Whenever we own something, we value it more than something that somebody else does not own. It turns out they did a study that they were trying to see if two people valued a coffee mug the same. It turns out that the people who owned it valued it more than those who did not, even though the market price, in theory, should be equal. And so in many ways, we see that what we've worked on, we think it's worth more, and therefore we don't want to dispose of it. Number 3, we actually don't know what we want, so we don't know if we're getting it. Half the time, we just think that we want to start a startup. Like, it's amazing. I want to be a rock star. I want to have my own thing. But you're actually, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to change how people communicate in the world? Am I trying to revolutionize how pollution is changed? Am I trying to simplify the lives of people and parents with teddy bears, for example, because parenting is a high-stress thing, so it's a mission? Because if you know what you want to do and how you want to do it, it's easier to make decisions that are consistent with your vision and dismissing those that are not. Another one is called the Bandwagon Effect. Sometimes we're too busy believing other people's stories, and therefore we persist because everybody else is saying, yeah, I'm doing well, yeah, my startup is awesome. And especially when you go to networking meetings or parties with other founders, everybody's doing amazing. And so you feel like you should be doing amazing too, and so why should you stop? Because everybody else is doing amazing. And 5, we're fearful of what will happen in the future. There's always this feeling, we were talking earlier in the panel about the fear of the culture of fear in Italy. I don't know if that's necessarily true. One, it turns out that in psychological tests, it's your predisposition to life that determines what your outcome is after a positive or negative effect over a period of time. So for example, if you're an inherently negative person, even if you win the lottery, over a year later, you will be just as pissed off at life after the lottery as you were before. Doesn't matter. The same thing. If you are a positive person and you have something catastrophic happen to you a year later, your life satisfaction will generally gravitate back to the same life satisfaction that you had before. So most of us sometimes get paralyzed, like, think about how many romantic relationships we've all been in that we should have ended earlier. Think about how many companies or employees we felt that we want to keep because we're friends with them, but maybe perhaps we should let go. So again, I ask you this question. If I knew that I'd be better off, would I take action sooner? So things to consider before you make this transition. 1, determine what success looks like for you. Determine your vision. And I don't mean like write on your PowerPoint, my vision is to be the best startup that da-da-da. No, actually really think about what it is that drives you and your team and what is the value that you're going to uphold when everything is going wrong. Stacy Peralta, how many of you were skateboarders when you were younger? A few of you. Okay, I was a skateboarder. I had hair at one point too. And actually that background picture is of me jumping off my ramp when I was a kid. And Stacy Peralta was one of the famous skateboarders of the 70s, and he started a team called Paulo Peralta Bones Brigade. And he had had such a horrible time with his previous team that he really emphasized that the brand Paulo Peralta and the Bones Brigade brand would stand for team unity. And every decision that he made was around promoting team values, keeping the team together, bringing the best skaters together. And as a consequence, they had the best skateboarding team and brand of the era when I was growing up. It resonated with you. Everybody wanted to have that. And think about the culture that Steve Jobs has created with Apple. Same thing. You can feel the products reflect that, and every single decision they make eliminates choices based upon the coherence of vision. A strong vision determines a strong culture, and a strong culture internally drives a good product or service for your customers. If you don't have the founder having a strong vision, you're going to have a weak culture and a weak product as a consequence. The second thing is set out to be something for someone. Don't be everything for everyone. Earlier, Giuliani mentioned that I was going to talk about this concept of a minimum viable segment. A minimum viable segment is a way of saying, what's the minimum target market that you need to have addressing so that you can get confirmation as to whether your product is meaningful. Many of us have this desire to really go as broad as possible. But when you go really broad, what ends up happening is that you waste resources, you waste the ability for your customers, because they're very similar. If you were only target one customer and they were very similar, they talk amongst themselves. But if you have such a broad group, there's the referral between customer groups, it doesn't happen because age groups don't talk to different age groups. So by being very targeted about your minimum viable segment, you have more liquid interactions between your customers, and you have faster acknowledgement of whether or not your idea is hitting product market fit. Be something for someone, not everything for everyone. And if you believe that you have a strong positioning and you've identified something that you want to work on passionately because that's your vision, then of course, by all means, persevere. Keep on going. That's when you got out the 10%, but not before. And one of the things that, going back is going to be difficult, isn't it? One of the things that one of the founders told me that was instrumental during the process of making this, especially when their company failed, was that they were building relationships constantly. Every single one of the startups that we have had that have not done well or are struggling, because of the relationships that they built during their time at Seedcamp, the people that they helped introduce, the people that they spent sometimes in the weekend over a beer assisting them, those are the very same people that later, when their company was going through a hard time, helped them. And so one of the biggest things that can help you during this journey is to build these relationships whilst you're going through your journey, because at the end of the day, what will happen is that if you do well, it'll be great, and you'll be part of a nice ecosystem that you helped build, but if it doesn't go well, they will be your safety net. And the last point is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. So, 3 questions for Carlos. Who raises his hand? You scared them.
I scared them, no.
No one is going to do a question? Okay.
All right.
We have a question. We have some shit.
Repeat the question. How do you know when you're getting too specific when you're targeting your market?
So that's a good question. So how do you know when you're being too specific? Well, it depends. I mean, to some extent, the more specific you can get, the better. I mean, to some extent, people tend to stop too early. Like, say, for example, people say 18 to 35. And then they'll say, well, no, that's too broad. Let's go to 18 to 20. And you say, well, actually, is 1 year gap really my minimum viable segment? Where, in fact, it's entirely different. It's somebody who's in school, or somebody who is taking college entrance exams, or a parent who's their first child for the Teddy the Guardian versus their second and third child. So you start off with the most reasonable minimum group, and then you expand outwards, rather than starting from the biggest group and trying to work your way downwards. So what is the smallest one? Well, it's the most reasonable one. I mean, of course, if you're going to go down to the point where, like, somebody who looks like this, talks like this, does that, does this, you're going to start hitting walls, right? There's one concept that we talk about during Seedcamp onboarding week, which is the creation of a proto-persona. A proto-persona is a shorter version for saying a prototype persona. So you create this prototype persona, which represents a potential minimum viable segment. So let's say a proto-persona for Teddy the Guardian would be a parent who is first-time parent, highly educated, lives in an urban setting, makes X amount of money, usually capable of doing quantification of things, so is confident with Excel and other things. And you start building this proto-persona, and you build the marketing and the positioning statement around that proto-persona, and then you see how that responds. And it's not so much whether or not you need to be more broad or not, it's just how your messaging is responsive towards that kind of individual. If you start seeing that the channels that person you expect would be consuming the information, magazines or websites, if you're seeing that there's a good conversion there, then you potentially stick with that very, very narrow view and slowly build your way out. So that's kind of how you would start.
So I would refer to an example as Airbnb. Before they started scaling, they were just a small startup, and at a certain point, they understood that having good pictures on the announcement of the house was crucial. But before they understood that, they were, I mean, the myth said that they were about to quit. If they decided to quit at that point, probably they would not have been Airbnb as we know it now. So in your opinion, what's the right point when you decide the right things that make you understand that you still have to go further?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So part of the discussion of the talk that I was scheduled to give on product market fit is that there's an iterative approach to testing whether or not you're stuck on something. So you can test out whether your customer segment is the reason why you're wrong. You could test out the positioning. You can test out the product. You can test out the go-to-market. And each one of those things will look differently on your analytics dashboard. And for example, if you're looking that a lot of people are landing on your website, but very few are converting on pirate metrics, it could be that something in your product is the reason why things are dropping out. So by having the appropriate analytics and looking for the right numbers in your dashboard, you will look that actually you do have some level of traction, you just don't have conversion to an action, and therefore you shouldn't necessarily quit at that point because you're just trying to figure out how to streamline that funnel rather than, oh my goodness, it's not working. When it's not working, nothing is working, right? Like, because the analytics will tell you where things are going wrong. If for example, you land on the website, very few people land on the website, but the people that do land on your website stick, and they're there for a long period of time, and they spend money, then it's your positioning and go-to-market channels that are wrong. But the product's right, because the few people that randomly show up, they're like, I love this, right? So that's what's wrong. So you would merit persevering and fixing those things. And in the product market fit cycle, you can read the blog post, but basically it just goes through an iterative approach of dissecting each one of those variables as a single variate testing rather than multivariate testing. So perseverance, as long as you have some form of traction or some form of validation, you should continue until you figure out what it is. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you.